Over 51 centuries ago, our ancestors did their very best to inform and warn us of what they knew would be an era of powerful transition in the future they could only imagine in their dreams. That era is now, and the transition has already begun. To understand their message is to understand our journey through the heavens and time, and it's all about cycles. Time Code 2 reminds us that our ancestors recorded their experience of the last end of time, showing us beyond reasonable doubt that the close of one world age is the beginning of the next and not the end of the world. The very nature of a cycle is that it repeats itself. So every time the end of one cycle appears, by definition it's also the beginning of the next. The key here is that to get to the beginning of what's new, the cycle must pass through the end of what already exists. And while this repeating nature of cycles is obvious on the small scale of things like seasons of the year and phases of the moon, it's not always so obvious when we're talking about cosmic cycles like solar systems moving through the galaxy. This is where the message of our Mayan ancestors comes in. They recognized the nature of time cycles long before science described our journey through the heavens. Their timekeepers preserved what they knew and incorporated it into stories about the universe and life, non-scientific descriptions of creation and destruction, birth and death, beginnings and endings. While the specifics regarding the end of time vary across tradition, culture, and religious belief, there's a common theme that seems to run through all of them, almost universally. Ancient predictions for our time in history describe an age filled with an epic darkness. From the Hindu descriptions of the great yugas to the Mayan long count marking the remaining days of the current great cycle, the close of our age has been prophesied, predicted, feared, and anticipated as an era of war, suffering, excess, and inequality. And while these descriptions sound ominous, there is a bright side. Although the darkness appears to be necessary, it also appears to be brief. The reason? Physically, our solar system is moving through the shortest part of an orbit called an ellipse. The shape is important because it looks like a flattened circle, and our journey has carried us to the most distant point in our orbit from the center of our home galaxy, the Milky Way. Both ancient traditions and modern science tell us that our location in this cyclic orbit determines how we experience the powerful sources of energy that radiate from our galaxy's core. Energy like the massive magnetic fields that have been recently discovered there. New studies suggest that it's precisely such cycles that influence the quality of life on Earth and may explain the mysterious rise and fall of life here on our planet, even the mass extinctions that happened 250 and 450 million years ago. Additionally, modern discoveries now confirm that our planet's position throughout the journey, things like orbit, tilt, and wobble, create the ever-changing cycles that influence everything from the temperature and climate to polar ice and the magnetic fields of Earth. The key here is that our location in these cycles also appears to have a direct emotional and spiritual effect upon us. As we travel further from our galaxy's core, the same ancient traditions that describe the cycles also describe how we sense our distance from the galaxy's energy source, as a sense of a loss of connection, one that we experience both spiritually and emotionally. Scientific links between the quality of Earth's magnetic fields, how they're affected by cosmic conditions, and our sense of well-being seem to support precisely such ancient beliefs. In the same way that Earth's rotation makes the darkest part of the night appear just before the dawn, our position in the heavens makes the darkest part of our world age appear just before our heavenly orbit begins the return that brings us closer to the light of our galaxy's core. With that return, we experience relief from the cataclysmic forces of the cycles of darkness. And just as the night must pass to get to the new day, the only way to get to the light of the next cycle is to finish the darkness of this one. We all know that while dark experiences definitely exist in our world, and we don't need to look far to find them, there's also much more to life than the suffering and the destruction the ancients foresaw and predicted, much more. Even in our time of great darkness, the polarities of peace, healing, love, and compassion are alive, well, and abundant. Our ancestors had an amazingly deep grasp of just what our experience of cosmic cycles means on multiple levels. Somehow they knew that Earth's position in the heavens would affect the physical conditions in our world, as well as the emotional and spiritual experiences that we need to embrace those conditions. Through myth, analogy, and metaphor, traditions from the Native American Hopi to the ancient Hindu Vedas reminded us that the further we travel away from the core of our galaxy, the deeper we are in the darkness, the more we feel lost, and the more out of sync we find ourselves with the fields that influence life here on Earth. They cautioned at the darkest point in our cycle we would go so far as to forget who we are and forget our connectedness to one another in the Earth. They even told us that we would forget our past. It's precisely this disconnected feeling that seems to be the consequence of the cyclic journey that carries us to the far end of our galactic orbit. It's also the fear that is spawned by such feelings that has led to the chaos, war, and destruction at the end of cycles in the past. At the end of the last 2 world ages, for example, the ancient Hopi described the greed and the wars that led to the loss of the very things that we cherish the most: our families, our civilization, and ourselves. Archaeological discoveries of an advanced civilization located in the Indus River Valley between what is now India and Pakistan seem to support the Hopi myths, as well as those of the 100,000-line epic poem of the Hindu Mahabharata. The site has revealed the bodies of humans that appear to be in what the archaeologists call postures of flight, suggesting that they were fleeing from whatever it was that destroyed their civilization. Students of the Mahabharata suggest that the massive text describes a great war that was fought in the valley that marks the precise location of the new discoveries. The remains are now dated at approximately 7,000 to 10,000 years old, placing them into the time frame of the 2 world ages of the past. While such discoveries obviously warrant more study, we can learn from what we do know of them so far. When we understand what the darkness of our cycle has meant in the past, and why it's necessary, we begin to see the great challenges of our time in the new light, and with that light, our time in history and our response to the changes that come with it take on new meaning. With these ideas in mind, it becomes even clearer that now is the best time for us to go through such a cycle. The reason is because now is the first time we've had the understanding, the need, and the technology to reach into the realm of all possibilities and choose the kind of future that will arise from the chaos of the present. The reason is because now is the first time we have the understanding, the need, and the technology to reach into the realm of all possibilities and choose the kind of future that will arise from the chaos of the present. This is something that would have been impossible even 50 years ago. Looking closely at the stories and records that have been handed down to us for over 250 generations, it becomes obvious that those who experienced the end of the last world age worked hard to make sure that we know precisely what it means to do so. We find the fruits of their labor preserved for us today in their temples, texts, traditions, and cultures. Although the ancient creation stories, such as those of the Hopi, Hindu, and Mayan cultures, differ in specifics, they generally agree when it comes to the cyclic nature of the universe. They state that at least 3 great worlds have existed in the past and been destroyed before the one that we're living in today. While different traditions use different signs to tell us where we are in our world age cycle, it seems that all the signs are essentially telling us the same thing. The shift from the present age into the next one is now, in our lifetime. What sets the Mayan calendar apart from the oral traditions such as the Hopi is that their timeline for the shift ends on a specific date, while their system of calendars accurately identifies the alignment that marks the shift, a rare astronomical configuration that modern computers have actually confirmed. It's what the Maya knew about Earth's journey through the heavens that makes their story even more astounding. Specifically, they knew that during a zone of time before and after the 2012 winter solstice, Earth and our entire solar system would move into a position that is extraordinary by any standards. It's during this time that we move across an imaginary line that defines the two halves of our disc-shaped galaxy. Just the way the equator of the Earth divides the northern and southern hemispheres, the equator-like line that we cross in the Milky Way separates the top of the galaxy's disk from the bottom. As the planets of our solar system line up with one another and our Sun, our crossing of the galaxy's equator also aligns us with the mysterious source of energy that lies at the heart of the Milky Way. The Mesoamerican scholar John Major Jenkins was among the first to recognize the significance of this alignment as the completion of the great cycle indicated by the Mayan calendar. Well, to be absolutely clear, this is not an event that happens suddenly in a single day. In other words, our crossing of the imaginary line that divides our galaxy doesn't suggest that we'll all go to bed on December 20th of 2012 in one world and wake up the next morning to a radically different world on the 21st. Instead, the winter solstice appears to be the astronomical marker that the Maya chose to mark the center of the transition zone, and that zone begins well before and ends well after 2012. Because of the size and distances of heavenly bodies, to us here on Earth, this alignment appears as a slow, gradual shift over a period of time. Our familiar experience of an eclipse is a perfect illustration of how such a gradual shift occurs. If you've ever watched a lunar eclipse, for example, probably didn't take long to discover that it wasn't going to be over quickly. Once it began, you could go back into the house, fix a cup of tea, make a couple of phone calls, and feed the pets before going back outdoors to see the completion of the progress. Even though the Earth is hurtling through space at a speed of about 65,000 miles per hour, on the night of a lunar eclipse, such enormous speeds aren't obvious. That's the effect of huge objects like planets moving through space at tremendous speeds across vast distances. To us, they look like they're in slow motion. So in the case of the Sun moving into an alignment with the equator of the Milky Way, the winter solstice of 2012 marks a point within the zone of a shift that actually began years ago. In his landmark work, Maya Cosmogenesis 2012, Jenkins describes how such a transition is a process rather than an event. Using calculations made by Belgian astronomer Jan Meus, Jenkins suggests that the progression of the Sun across the zone of the Milky Way's equator covers a span of time that began in 1980 and ends around 2016. Even with a margin of error of plus or minus a few years, this means that we're already well into the alignment that the Maya predicted over 2,000 years ago. What does such a rare moment in astronomical history mean in our lives today? Well, the truth is, no one knows for sure. We can't, because no one living today has a direct experience of the last time something like this happened. What we do have, however, are good indicators of what we can expect. We have facts. When we marry the facts of today's science with the wisdom and the historic records of the past, we find a story that's almost beyond belief. It's the story of a journey, our journey, that began so long ago that it's taken over 256 generations and 5 millennia of time to reach the end. Now that we're doing so, we discover that the end is actually the start of a new journey. Perhaps poet and visionary T.S. Eliot best described the irony of an end being a beginning when he said, "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the very first time." While the story of a shifting world age based on our planet's orbit through the stars may sound like the plot of a Star Trek episode, the celestial calculations that our ancestors left to us are surprisingly consistent with the same scientific findings of today. When we put it all together, they tell the same story. And with that story, we suddenly have a new meaning for some of the great mysteries of our past, as well as the clues that tell us what to expect in our future. Fortunately, our ancestors left us everything we need to meet the challenges of a great world age. In addition to being about cycles, it's also about our ability to recognize patterns. During the 1980s, I worked in the defense industry writing software to look for patterns in data. It was during that time that the world experienced one of the most frightening and secretive eras in history, the Cold War, between the superpowers of the United States and the former Soviet Union. With over 70,000 nuclear-tipped weapons poised to strike the largest cities in Europe and North America at a moment's notice. It was also during this time that I found myself searching for a way to make sense of the Cold War and all wars within the context of a bigger picture. Was the Cold War part of a cycle? Could the seemingly random events leading to the wars of the past actually be part of a great, evolving pattern that began long ago? And if such a thing were possible, then do the patterns extend beyond the experience of war into things that happen in our daily lives, like love and betrayal and hurt? If we were to discover that every aspect of our world is part of an ancient and ongoing cycle, such a discovery would give us a powerful new way to think of ourselves. It would imply that everything from the beginnings and the endings of jobs and relationships to the exact year when war is waged and peace is declared are all parts of a cycle, a pattern that makes it possible to reveal the conditions for the future that we've already experienced in the past. If such a pattern actually exists, then we could even take its meaning one step further. It would allow us to pinpoint an experience, any experience, from love and romance to betrayal and hurt, and find that it's part of a pattern that can be known and, more importantly, predicted. Such a vantage point would go a long way in helping us to make sense of our world. It would also be of immense value as we embark upon our journey into the 21st century and find ourselves in the uncharted territory of merging the knowledge and ideas of East and West, ancient wisdom and modern science, to solve the great challenges that threaten our very survival. Well, you've probably guessed the answer to each of my questions regarding the cycles is the same. It's yes. The reason for the answer could fill volumes, and it's the subject of this audio book. The key to such a powerful view of time and history is that we can only understand how cycles relate to life by crossing the fuzzy line that's traditionally separated science from the spiritual traditions of our ancestors. For example, when we marry the ancient understanding of time cycles with Nobel Prize-winning physicist Albert Einstein's 20th century discovery of the unity of time and space, something wonderful begins to happen. 3 facts emerge with implications that change everything that we've been led to believe about our lives and the world. Fact number 1. Einstein's theory of relativity forever merged our ideas of space and time into the single essence called space-time. Fact number 2. The events of everyday life, things like romance, war, peace, planetary orbits, stock market fluctuations, the rise and fall of civilizations, and so on, all happen within space-time. And fact number 3. Things that happen in space-time follow natural rhythms. These facts carry 2 powerful implications that lay the foundation for the rest of this audiobook, and they can be summarized as the following time codes. Time code number 3 reminds us that new discoveries show that we can think of time as an essence that follows the same rhythms and cycles that govern everything from particles to galaxies. And time code number 4 reminds us that we can think of the things that happen in time as places within cycles, points that can be measured, calculated, and even predicted. With time codes 3 and 4 in mind, we have the reasons and the tools to think of time in a powerful new way. Rather than considering the minutes of each day as nature's way of keeping everything from happening at once, now we can think of time as a kind of code that connects the past with the future. And just as any other code can be cracked and read, the message of the ancient Mayan calendar may be deciphered and read like the pages of a book. For some people, this perspective of time is a strange way of thinking of things. For others, while it's certainly unconventional, it also makes perfect sense. The idea is fascinating. The implications are deep, mysterious, and exhilarating. While they challenge much of the way we've been taught to think of the universe, we also find ourselves powerfully drawn to such a possibility. We want to know more. We find ourselves wanting to apply this new understanding of time to the real world to make sense of everything, from the tragedies of life to the mysteries of the future, and we can. Although quantum scientists tell us that we can never predict an exact future, what we can predict are probabilities for that future. This is precisely what the existence of repeating cycles of time demonstrates. Although quantum scientists tell us we can never predict an exact future, what we can predict are probabilities for the future. This is precisely what the existence of repeating cycles of time demonstrates. Each time a cycle appears, it repeats the general conditions that make something possible rather than a precise outcome. Just as the conditions in Earth's atmosphere, for example, can create the perfect environment for a tornado without ever actually forming one, time's cycles can bring together all of the circumstances that led to an event in history without that event occurring again in the present. The key here is that the ingredients for a repetition are present and the situation is primed. The way those conditions play out, however, is determined by the choices that we make in life. To know in advance where our choices can have the greatest impact tips the scales in our favor as we complete the cycle that holds our well-being and ultimately our survival in the balance. Time Code 5 reminds us that if we know where we are in a cycle, then we know what to expect when it repeats. If we can really think of time in the universe in the same way that we think of the stuff that happens in life, as the events that fill it, then the cycles within time can be measured the same way we measure the stuff that happens. Just the way we can predict the cyclic return of a comet streaking through the universe, suddenly we can also pinpoint the year when the conditions that led to the rise of a civilization or an act of war or even an act of personal betrayal will come around again. The beauty of such an understanding is that along with the moments in time that are ripe for chaos, we can also pinpoint the moments in our future that are ripe for peace. Because all cycles are based upon natural rhythms, we can use the universal codes that govern everything from the movement of quantum particles to the shape of our galaxy in a formula that takes the guesswork out of finding the places in time we're searching for. And that's precisely what we'll do in the chapters that follow. Once we develop the ideas of time cycles, we can use our understanding in one of two ways. We can follow the instructions in this book to make our own time code calculator that tells us how to find the times in our future when we can expect a repeat of the conditions of our past. Or we can use the automated web-based version at www.gregbraden.com that does the same thing for us. Either way, we'll be able to plug in a specific year, such as the end of the Mayan cycle in 2012, to find the time or the times in the past that tell us what to expect when the cycle returns. In doing so, we give ourselves an unprecedented view into time and something concrete to anchor our expectations on for the end of the present great age. But the time code calculator is not limited only to major events on a global scale. It works for the things that happen in everyday life as well. From the joys and crises in our personal lives to the tension between nations, it appears that the conditions leading to the pivotal moments of life repeat themselves as cycles large and small and follow the same natural rhythms. To use the cycles in our lives, we must recognize the patterns, when they begin, how they play out, and how to read them. To clarify what I mean here, Time Code 6 states that the time code calculator shows us when we can expect the conditions of the past, not the events themselves. This is precisely why the time code calculator is so valuable. Along with the repeating cycles that make the conditions possible, each cycle also contains choice points, moments when the change seems to come easier and be most effective. So while the themes of global war, personal betrayal, and peace themselves may be set into a timeline, the outcome for each of these specific themes is not. As is the case with all human experience, it's what we do with the condition presented to us that writes the next chapter in our experience. The key to using our choice points is that for us to affect our future in a conscious way, we must recognize where we are in the cycle. This all begins with us realizing that we're actually living a time code of sorts, a pulsating field of energy that has a beginning, is ever expanding, and carries what scientists have called the forward march of time. It's ideas like these that trigger a cascade of questions in our mind. Does the past really hold a blueprint for the future? What could something that happened 1,000 years ago possibly tell us about today? And what about the mysterious end date of the Mayan cycles? Is there a way to look backward in time to give us an idea of what may be in store for us in 2012? These are the questions that led to the research for this audiobook. The rest of what follows is their answer. I know there's certainly no shortage of books and media exploring the Mayan calendar in the year 2012. It seems like every month, new ones show up on the bookshelves and in internet bookstores. As with any topic that strikes a powerful chord in people's hearts and minds, the new books offer very different, sometimes even conflicting perspectives, ranging from scholarly predictions that have taken years to research, to stream of consciousness dictations claimed to be from off-planet intelligence. All serve a purpose. All add to the collective momentum that appears to be building as we approach the winter solstice of December 21st, 2012. It's precisely because such powerful works already exist that I had to be very clear about my contribution to the 2012 literature. What could I possibly say that has not already been said? Maybe the best way to answer this question is to state clearly what this audiobook is, what it's not, and what it offers. In the discussions that follow, together, we'll discover how the conditions for the Mayan end date of 2012 AD have already happened in our past as a fractal of what we can expect in our future. We'll see how nature's most beautiful numbers guide us to the places in the past that describe that future. We'll identify the hot dates that hold the greatest threats of war and the greatest opportunities for peace in our future. You can calculate your own time code for the key events and relationships in your life. And together we'll discover the personal and collective choice points of life and history, moments in time when change seems to come easier than it does at others. Fractal time is the result of over 20 years of research and my personal journey to make sense of the repeating cycles of life, love, and war. If you've always searched to answer the questions, does history repeat itself? And how is the future connected with the past? Then you'll like this audio. The key to 2012 and our time in history is to understand the language of nature's cycles and to use that language today to prepare for the future. Ultimately, we may discover that our ability to understand and apply the rules of fractal time holds the key to our deepest healing, our greatest joy, and even our survival as a species. Fractal time was created with one purpose in mind: to read the map of time. In doing so, we give meaning to the past while unlocking the code of life's possibilities in the future, both opportunities that future generations will have to wait another 26,000 years to see again.